Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. Today we're talking to Bob Routsong. Bob, how you doing?
Terrific. Thank you for having me.
You're looking pretty good. I
Well,
like your gray hair.
I just turned 79 on Tuesday.
You're a baby.
Yeah, that's good.
I would have guessed you were probably 45.
I ask people how old I am, and they say, well, you're about 65. And I give them a big hug and a kiss, or I pay them off.
How many of you had to pay off?
Quite a few.
After you gave them the hug and the kiss.
Right.
Where are you from?
Well, I'm originally from Los Angeles, born and raised in Los Angeles, and I grew up. That was our home. We lived not far from the University of Southern California. As a matter of fact, my father owned 1 3/8 acres, and the back of the property was on the backside of the fraternity and sorority row of USC. And I used to go to a grammar school there, which was kind of across the street from the campus of the University of Southern California. And I became a big SC fan, of course. And when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, I would run out of the school grounds over to SC and became one of the bat boys for the baseball team. And so that's what we did. And then we lived not far from the Los Angeles Coliseum. And so I would go down to the Coliseum with my older brother, and we would sell newspapers, and we'd sell maybe 15 or 20 newspapers, and they would give us a pass to get into the football games. So I became a big SC fan. And then, of course, I went on into high school. My mother was a school teacher for the Los Angeles school system, and she decided in high school that I needed to go to a prep school. So I went to a boys' school up near Pasadena, and it wasn't far from Caltech. And I went there, and it was a tough program. You learned a lot, though. Learned a lot about world history and so forth. In fact, I read in the Wall Street Journal the other day that universities and colleges do not teach Western civilization classes anymore. They don't require them. And I can't imagine not having that kind of an education that gives you a foundation of where we came from as a society and what we're all about. And so that was my early years.
Well, that sounds exciting. What did you do after Caltech?
I didn't go to Caltech. I went to a prep school. It's called Flint Ridge Preparatory School for Boys. It was all boys. It has since been become a co-educational school. When I was there, I was in the largest graduating class at the time.
How big was that?
21 boys. And so in this school, we had all kinds of sports activities, and I lettered in football, basketball, baseball, and swimming. And we won championships in practically all those sports. We played other private schools, and we did quite well.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
Well, after I graduated from high school, I went to BYU, Brigham Young University.
I've heard of that.
I think so. And I went there for a year. I signed up for Air Force ROTC, and I did a year in Air Force ROTC at BYU. There's an interesting story later on. I'll come back to that, the significance of that. And I did a year, and then I was called by the LDS Church to serve a mission in France. So I went to France, and that was an interesting thing. In those days, you went to Salt Lake to the mission training center, but you only went for a week. And then they put you on a train in Salt Lake, and you traveled clear across the country. We stopped in Chicago. We got off the train, and some guy had been prearranged, spotted us, and he took us to see some historic sites in Chicago. We got back on the train and then stopped at Niagara Falls. We got off, and they took us around Niagara Falls. We went on Maid of the Mist, you know, to see the Niagara Falls, and then we went to New York City, and we took a tour around New York City, and then they put us on a huge ocean liner, the USS America, and that took 4 days. And in those days, they put the missionaries in cabin class. There's first class, cabin class, and then different levels of classes under that. So another friend and I, we were very inquisitive of what's going on in first class. So we walked up in first class, and we're walking through, and some guy yells at us. He says, "Hey, come over here." And he says, "I want you to meet my 2 daughters. They have no other boys around here." And we says, "Okay, we'll meet your daughters." They were very disappointed that we were Mormon missionaries. But anyway, that was fun. We landed in Calais and went down to Paris and met the mission president, and then they shipped us off to different parts. I was assigned up to Liège, Belgium for 3 months, and then I went down to La Rochelle in France for 10 months, and then finally up to Lausanne, Switzerland. And Switzerland was really the best living because they had what they call chauffage central. That means central heating. Now, in Belgium and in France, you're outside knocking on the door all day long, see? But in Switzerland, you get into an apartment with central heating. It makes quite a difference on how you feel during the day. So I had an interesting time in the mission field.
What year was that?
Well, that was from October of '57 to April of 1960. And about 2 months before I was to finish my mission, we had a visiting general authority there. And I said, his name was Alvin Dyer. Actually, he was the European mission president at the time. And I said to him, President Dyer, I'd like to go home the long way. And at this time, they had given up sending people on boats. They were flying them. And he said, where do you live? I said, Los Angeles. And he says, well, he says, do your parents agree? And I said, yes. He says, do you have the money? I said, yes. Okay. So this is unheard of today in the LDS Church for missionaries. And I traveled for 10 weeks, all by myself. I left Paris. I went to, my first stop was Athens, Greece. And that was interesting because one of the things I wanted to see was the Parthenon, which is up on the hill. Well, as you go up from the city, walking up to the Parthenon, there's a famous hill. It's called Mars Hill. And that's where Paul preached to the Athenians. I said, I'll never have another opportunity like this. So as the tourists were coming up, I said, would you all gather around? And I gave them the story of my church and the restoration. And I felt, if Paul can do it, so can I.
So you are the modern Paul.
I guess so. I went to Damascus. I lived for a week in the old city of Jerusalem. I went to Cairo, saw the pyramids. I went to Pakistan, and I went to a place called Lahore. And that's where Genghis Khan and his troops in the 1200s or 1300s built a huge mosque. And it was very famous, and so I went to see that. And then I went to New Delhi, and of course I got to see the Taj Mahal. And then I went to Thailand, and then Hong Kong. And my missionary suits had worn out by this time. So I had custom suits for like $50 a piece in those days. And then I went to Japan, and I spent 10 days in Japan seeing all the wonderful things at Kyoto and Nara and Nikko and so forth. So that was interesting. And then I came home. I went in the Army for 6 months. I got out. In the meantime, when I got home, I met a beautiful young lady who was working in Los Angeles for the summer, who was about ready to graduate from Utah State. So anyway, I went in the Army. We corresponded. When I got out of my 6 months, I went back to Utah State to see what was happening there. And in the meantime, my unit got called up in the Berlin crisis in 1961. You probably remember that. And so I said to this beautiful young lady, I said, you know, I hate living in those Army barracks again. Would you kindly marry me so we can live off post?
Well, there are a lot of reasons to get married. I guess that's one of the best ones.
Right. And so we got married, and we drove all the way back to Massachusetts, where I was stationed for a year. We got out. I came back. I went to BYU, and I graduated with a master's degree in international affairs. And I always wanted to be, as a result of my French background, French language capability, wanted to go into international business. And so I wrote my master's thesis on the subject of recruitment and employment practices of U.S. companies in international business. I wanted to find out what you had to do to get a job in the international business. Here was my conclusion of my thesis, that if you're graduating from college and have really no work experience, it's unlikely that you're going to find a job doing international business. But here was the interesting thing. I had a classmate that was gone for a week, and when he came back, I said, where have you been? Oh, I've been interviewing down in Southern California with Hughes Aircraft Company. and they have a position opening. Oh, really? Yeah, he says, but they want somebody with a either French or German language capability. And he says they don't want to hire me because I speak Chinese. I was on a mission in China, in Taiwan. So, make a long story short, I sent my resume down there, and lo and behold, I get a telegram back saying, we'd like to interview you. And so, actually, I went down, I interviewed, and I got the job.
Nice of your roommate to get this job for you.
Right. And so this was a most fabulous job. And I had a fabulous career at Hughes Aircraft Company. Hughes Aircraft does not make airplanes. It makes electronics. Electronics of all different kinds. They invented the laser. They were very big in developing night vision equipment, thermal imaging. Hughes, when I got there in 1965, they were building the first soft landing on the moon. It was called Surveyor, and it was a four-pronged thing, payload that they launched, and when they arrived at the moon, they turned the direction of the payload, and so as it came down, they had a thruster, and it soft landed on the moon. And Hughes had 7 payloads, 5 of them were successful. This was preceding, of course, the man landing on the moon. And so that was really interesting technology. But my job, Hughes had established some joint venture companies with the big power companies, aerospace companies in Europe. For example, we had 2 joint ventures in Germany, one in Bonn and one in Heidelberg, with AEG Telefunken. You've heard of Telefunken, of course. And in France, the company was Thomson CSF. It's a big electronics company in France. And then we had a company up in Brussels, and with another company up in Brussels, and then we had a company up in Sweden with a company called Bofors. Bofors is known for making huge guns, and so they wanted our laser and fire control technology. Each of these companies wanted Hughes technology, and so we established joint ventures with them, we licensed to them, and it was a great business model. My job at Hughes was, first of all, as a trainee. And after I had been there only 9 months, the fellow that I was working with said that he was leaving and I was going to get the job. And I thought that was great. He was a Harvard MBA guy, and he was going to work as a vice president for American Express. And so it was a great opportunity. And during that time, my role was to provide oversight at the corporate level for Hughes of these joint venture companies. And so I would go every 3 months, I would go to Europe to have meetings with the management and find out what's going on and so forth. And I would prepare all of the information for the board of directors meetings. Another part of this aspect of this job was that I would be in charge of monitoring all our licensees. We had licensees in England, Belgium, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain, and Israel. And so I would visit these licensees to make sure that they were paying us a fair royalty. See? So I did a lot of travel, a lot of that. After I did this for 13 years in that particular position, and I said, well, it's time for me to do something else. So I got a job at Hughes as a marketing manager for major weapon systems. And I, in this capacity, traveled all over the Middle East, South America, and Asia. So it was a fabulously interesting thing. And at one point, I decided it was getting a little dangerous to travel internationally, and so I got out, and they put me in charge of a major weapon system in the U.S. It's called the tow weapon system. Have you ever heard of it? Mm-hmm. And how are we doing on time here?
You got about 5 minutes left.
Okay. I used to go to the Pentagon every 4 weeks, and I would brief full colonels, and on occasion I would brief a 1- and 2-star general. Now you remember when I went, I told you that I was in the Army Reserve. Because I had been in the Army Reserve, or because I had been taken Air Force ROTC, when I went into the Army, I went in as an E2. E2 is just one step above the lowest guy in the Army. When I went on active duty for 1.5 years, they never promoted me. And so I thought it was poetic justice. After all those years, I could come back and brief a 1- and 2-star general as an E2, and I thought it was poetic justice.
Did you tell him you were an E2?
No.
In our conversation over at the clinic, you mentioned some connection with Wayne Owens.
Yes. Wayne Owens became subsequently a congressman from Utah. And Wayne and I first met in the mission field, because he was in the same mission, French mission, and we met in Belgium. And he and I went tracting one day. And I was just a new missionary, he was just a new missionary. But he asked me, he said, where'd you go to school? I said, well, I went to BYU. And I said, well, what did you major in? And I said, well, I majored in political science. And he says, oh, that's great. He says, what do you think of President Eisenhower? And I didn't know much of anything in those days. And I said, well, I think he's a good president. And Wayne said to me, you do? And then he proceeded to lecture me on why Eisenhower was such a poor president. And some years later, I was in Washington, D.C., working on a white paper to defeat some legislation at the time, and I had some free time. And I went over to his, this is 20 years later, I went over to his office, and I went into his office, and his secretary, I walked in, and she says, Elder Routsong, what are you doing here? It was one of the sister missionaries that had was working for him. I says, well, I wanted to see if Wayne was available. So he says, sure. And she took me into Wayne and says, look who's here. Oh, have a seat. And so then he asked me, he says, well, what are you doing here? And so I told him that I was in Washington preparing with the Aerospace Association, preparing a white paper to defeat the Hartke bill. And Wayne paused, and then he said, yes, I had to think long and hard about that. He was one of the co-sponsors. And I said to Wayne, now look, as far as I'm concerned, he's just a buddy friend of mine, and he's a sitting congressman. I said, Wayne, are you stupid or something? And I was loaded for bear, and I was able to tell him all the reasons why he had made a mistake. But that was my experience with him.
Did the bill get defeated?
Yes.
Well, Doug Owens, Wayne's son, is running for Congress. You knew
Yes,
that.
I've met him.
Yeah. Well, we've got a minute and a half left. What's your final word?
Well, my final word is that I've had a fabulous life and a fabulous career, and it's not over. I'm working with a startup company, and we're in the process of getting funding, probably $20 million, and we're creating, we take old rubber tires, we grind them up, we have a chemical formula, we put it in a form, and heat and pressure, out pops an all rubber railroad tie. And we're trying to get into business to do that. They're superior to wood ties.
Well, Bob, that sounds fantastic. I was involved once with a rubber recycling program that made irrigation hose, and it worked out really well in spite of me. This is Lane Rano from the campus of Dixie State University. We've been talking with Bob Routsong. Did I pronounce that right?
Routsong.
Routsong.
It's easier than Rouwenzahner, where it originally came from.
Thank you for being with us on A Story to Tell.